Coming up on New Media Tech, we have the new news this week because I just recorded the other show just like 10, 15 minutes ago. I finished it. But we are going to talk about some doing shows live or recording them only. Does your netcast need video? We talked about that a little bit last week. We're going to expand on that a little bit. Keeping things simple. Don't stress over the little things. Grow a tough skin. And how to deal with slow to grow things, netcast and podcast. All that coming up right after this. All right, it's time for another episode of New Media Tech. This is episode number 6, and this week is going to be a rather quick week. This show is pre-recorded because when this show is released, I'm actually going to be out of town and won't be around to release it on Monday, or record it on Monday. So I'm actually going to pre-record it, which I'm doing right now, and coming up, or 1 week closer to the NAB show. The NAB show is coming up. I can't wait to see what comes out of it. And unfortunately, I'm not going to NAB. So all you NABers, while you're at NAB, I'm going to be on vacation. So, all right. So some of our subjects this week. Remember what I said last time? Don't be perfect. So I won't cut that out. You're going to see me stutter all my words. That's just part of being who I am, being part of the show. We do not over-edit our shows. It's just part of making it feel natural. All right. So we mentioned last week about live. Do you do it live or do you record it? And we didn't want to talk about this. We kind of buzzed right through doing things live or recorded. And so I have it down here live or Memorex. Those of you that are a little bit older will remember what that is. But I'm going to recommend Memorex. And the reason is doing things live tends to put a little bit more pressure on you to get things right the first time. Even if I don't recommend you make any changes. You let the mistakes in there. But in your mind, you're thinking like, I'm looking like an idiot in front of people sometimes if you think you're broadcasting it live. Even if you don't have anybody necessarily watching you while you do it, it just tends to be the case. So I definitely recommend recording it. And the whole thing is, I don't recommend you going back and deleting it. But if you think it's bad enough, you have the option to go back and delete it. And you can mess with it, edit it a little bit until you start feeling more comfortable in front of the microphone. Getting in front of one of these is very difficult for some people. It's even more difficult to get in front of one of those cameras right there in front of me, and but it gets easier. It does tend to get a lot easier. They become your friends very quickly. So I definitely recommend you just record it first, and maybe you want to record your first show as a demo show. You don't want to do it as a live show necessarily. It's definitely a possibility as well. And the thing about going back and playing it back, first of all, if you're doing it live, you still want to record it. So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying don't do it live via stream when you're first starting out, just for the first couple of weeks at least, until you feel comfortable with the process. If you're doing things via audio, you're probably going to have intro music, outro music, all that other stuff. And until you figure out how it all works and where you want to talk and all that, it's just better that you can focus on that versus focusing on who's live. Doing it live does present some nice things. That gives you a nice chat room. It's interactive with people in the chat room, and it's definitely a good way to go ultimately. So I just don't think starting out you want to do that. And we mentioned last week about video versus audio. Does your netcast need video? And that was basically what I was trying to get across last week. I must not have gotten that across quite the way that I thought I did. But you have to determine, does your netcast make sense without video? And I'd say for the bulk of things, they probably do. And it definitely would change your style of the show. If it's it makes it more of the talk style of show versus more of the show style of show. So that's something you have to decide. If you want to teach people how to do something that you need to see visually, then video is a requirement. And if that is the case, video is not necessarily expensive. I mentioned last week about webcams, and you can put multiple webcams on a computer, and they're on separate USB buses. You're probably not going to have any problem. And you can use some software to help control which one has it. So the software that I probably would recommend is like $500 though. So it's not necessarily inexpensive, but there is some less expensive software like XSplit Broadcaster that can do very similar things to what Wirecast would do. And that's what Wirecast is the one that's like $500. But you can also go out to like best. Well, first of all, the advantage of doing that is they're USB, so they plug right into your computer, and nothing else is needed. You can go out and get a cheap camera like this. This is like $250. This is what I use on Let's Make It, and it just sits up here on this above me right here and faces down to look at the Arduino and everything, or whatever I'm working on that week. And it does a great job, and it looks great for $250. It looks great. The problem is this outputs HDMI, so that becomes another challenge to get the HDMI into your computer to switch it. And if you're using a laptop, there is external boxes you can buy to do that, but there's costs involved with that as well. So those costs start adding up, and you can get up quickly to more than $500. Now, what I use to get from this camera into the switcher is a Blackmagic HDMI to SDI, which is like $250 to $300 to buy. So that's in addition to the camera, just to get it into the switcher. So it's something to consider. If you can just take a webcam and just face it down and find some way to mount it above, or if you're doing a two-person type interview where one's on you and one's on the person across from you, just turn them opposite directions. Use XSplit Broadcaster, which I think is like $60, is one of the options that you have. Or you can go, the whole way to Wirecast, and that's like another $400. And there's a couple of ones out there too that we'll talk about when we get to the software portion. But that's just one of your options you have if you think video is important in your show. All right, as I mentioned in the beginning, don't stress over the little stuff, which is why I said live is not a good thing. The mistakes you made, like I made mistakes in the beginning of the show, I won't cut them out. That's just the way I am, and that's just me. That makes me who I am, and I don't want to change who I am. So we're just going to do that. However, that being said, sometimes you have to grow a tough skin. I can say so far I've been lucky that I haven't gotten a lot of really bad comments that really rub me the wrong way, but I typically want rough comments to tell me what I need to fix. So if you ask somebody for what they think, be prepared for them to give you the honest answer, because if they're going to sugarcoat it, they're not going to help you. You want to know how bad or how good it really is. So that's just part of the tough skin part. Just don't let it go. So the other thing that's going to frustrate you starting out is it's going to be slow to grow. There is a ton of media out there now, and it's just getting more and more all the time. So how are you going to stand out? Which is part of what we're talking about with social media, figuring out who your audience is and figuring out where they are to go to them and get them to you can tell them that you're there, basically, is what we need to do at this point. So it grows very slow. Our shows have been growing, we've been broadcasting since late December on a couple of our shows. And some of them are growing really fast, which is great, but some of them are growing kind of slow. And again, some of them are very niche market. I mentioned last week Security Decoded. It's very focused towards IT professionals and very focused towards secure IT professionals that deal with security. So we're not going to get like the average consumer out there watching us. And we know that. And we know that going into it. There are some things like Security 101 we think should be every person should be listening to Security 101 to give security tips on how to protect yourself on the internet, things like that, how to protect yourself on your cell phone, all that stuff we're talking about in Security 101. It applies to everyone, but it doesn't reach everyone. I mean, I know so many people who don't even think about security on their phone, and I wish they would think about it. It would solve a lot of problems. But that's just part of our demographic. That's who we're targeting is everybody, and we're making it at the level that everybody can understand, but not everybody will get it. So it's something they have to consider. You just can't assume that, everybody's going to, first of all, people that even are in the right demographic may not listen to podcasts, may not have the desire to listen to podcasts. Some people just leave work, like in our profession of IT, they leave work and they don't want to talk or think about IT stuff when they leave after that. And they would never really have a need to want to watch a podcast. So you really have to consider all this stuff. And it's definitely a learning experience. I would not have assumed that Let's Make It would have been taking off as much as it did. However, I'm glad to see that. And we've actually recently gotten some interesting news from other people who want to rebroadcast it on local cable TV channels. So that's awesome. That's awesome for us. And we're Creative Commons. You can rebroadcast where you want. I don't really care. You're welcome to do that. That's just part of figuring out where your audience is. And that's something I never would have guessed, is that particular market, like a school and things like that. I thought it was more like a hobbyist type thing. So it's one of those things trying to figure it out. But It started out with slow to grow. Be ready for it to grow slow, and don't get frustrated by growing slowly. The best thing you can do is distribute it around to friends that you trust, and that you ask them, if you know somebody that's like interested in this, please let them know, share it with them. That's the best way to get the word of mouth around, and then it'll start growing over time. iTunes is probably the biggest and best distribution, but you got to stand out there, and it's very hard to stand out in iTunes. Last week's show, I asked that people go out and they rate us and make comments in iTunes, and the reason for that is if you have no ratings and no comments, you're not going to be seen in iTunes. If somebody searches for you, you're going to not even see you. You have to be, have some ratings and decent ratings of that to get up in there, especially depending on how many people are in what you're talking about. Like if you go search for Arduino, we're up in the Arduino, probably in the first page of the Arduino. We got some good ratings out there. But if you go look for Idol, just the word Idol, and you see a lot of other American Idol stuff out there, we weren't even in the list. So we've asked the viewers of American Idol or the Idol Fancast to go out and rate us. Now I'm kind of curious to see what happens as far as where we fall in the list. So this is like an experiment for us to figure that out. The same thing goes with YouTube and Stitcher. They both work exactly the same way. So you need to get into the communities of users that would be interested in your particular subject and try to get them to help you get into where you can get found by other people that are interested in the same thing as well. The one thing I wanted to mention last week that I totally forgot about is if you're going to start getting into internet broadcasting, there's actually an organization for internet broadcasters or association for internet broadcasters, and it's free to join too. It's the IAIB, the International Association of Internet Broadcasters, and I think it's ibroadcast.org. Let me just check that to be sure. iBroadcastNetwork.org is what it is. Now, let me go check this to make sure. I was right. Just not coming up. It's iBroadcastNetwork.org. That is the site. And for some reason, it's not loading right now. Is the problem. That's why I went back. Oh, there it goes. Now it loads. All right. So it's free to sign up there. Definitely recommend you go sign up. They have some great forums. They're, I think they're kind of in the early stages of the forums. They're not like a super busy forum, but there's great stuff in the forums. So you get to meet people that way. And that's the best thing to do as far as getting to learn and understand and just read what else is out there. There's lots of good stuff out there. So that's one thing. And I also wanted to mention that we just joined a new network, and this will start showing up on our website the next day or so. We joined Tech Podcast, and let's see. I'll give you that information too. It's techpodcast.com. It's the Tech Podcast Network. Our shows are now on there. And this is actually a part of another organization. I'm trying to find the name of it. Is it called Mycast or something like that? Raw Voice. And it's a directory of podcasts. I won't say it's not a directory. It's a network of broadcast. And they do definitely check out your what you're doing and make sure you're approved to get on there. If you get approved, though, that's an easy way to go on a Roku. And we had to write our own Roku app. But we are also on techpodcast.com's Roku app as well. So you can find us both places in there. But we are now on the Tech Podcast Network. Happy to be there. The requirement is you have to basically mention that in the show. And you put a link to Tech Podcast on your show page. And we will gladly do that. We'll do both of those. So we're working on that now. So that was the other thing I had for this week. Another news announcement. And let's see. What else did I have? I think that's pretty much it. I'm going to start the 101 course recording this weekend, hopefully. As I mentioned before, I mentioned that last week's show because I recorded that just like 10 minutes before this show. So this weekend, I hope to start recording the 101 course stuff. And the next show can maybe get the first 101 video in the episode as well. And I am still looking for a co-host. I have not, as of right now, gotten anyone that was really interested in it yet. But if you know of somebody that is, or if you are, just let me know and we'll we'll talk and see what we can do. And when I get that co-host, and I'll pick a night or a day and time for the show, we'll turn the show into a live show so that we can get the chat room up and running. All right. Like I said, this week was going to be a very, very quick one. Didn't have a lot to talk about this week, considering I just talked about the news about half hour ago in the previous week's show. So while you're watching this, I'm actually out on vacation. So have a good week, and we'll be back next week. And maybe I'll get some video while I'm on vacation and maybe do a remote show of some kind or something. I don't know. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet when I'm gone. So there's a possibility for that as well. All right, that's it. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.